Today we're featuring. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second debate event of the NPDL spring season. It's a pleasure to have you all join us for this dynamic debate between Harvard University and the women from Maine DOC's Women's Center. And today's debate topic is going to be very lively, and we're going to get to that in a moment. Before we do, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us and all the individuals who've helped to make the NPDL's work possible. We'd like to begin with our esteemed coaches, Mr. Tripp Rebrovik from Harvard University, and Jasmine Pinkins, I'm told, also from Harvard University, and as well as our NPDL volunteer coaches, Ed Panetta from the University of Georgia, and John Katsoulis from Boston College. We also would like to thank all of the NPDL staff and volunteers who continue to make this engine run. So I am your Executive Director, Daniel Troop, and the NPDL, for those of you who aren't aware, is all about amplifying the voices of incarcerated people, breaking stereotypes, building bridges, and decarcerating minds. And that's what you're going to see personified today in dynamic fashion. Helping me do so is our Assistant Director, Ms. Brittany LaMarr. She'll be moderating today's event and handling the time. You'll see all of that on the screen. So I'm going to let her take it away from here and get this debate started. Brittany, please take it away.
All right. Thank you, Daniel, for the introduction. This afternoon's debate is as Daniel stated, a debate between Harvard and the women's team. Resolution resolved: the U.S. Congress should enact the Paycheck Fairness Act. Maine will argue in the affirmative, supporting this resolution, while Harvard argues in the negative position, refuting the affirmative cases. We have 5 very distinguished judges who will be scoring the teams on their analysis, reasoning, evidence, organization, refutation, and delivery. Serving as Chief Judge is Chief Judge Carla Leeper, Vice Chancellor for Strategic Communications and Public Affairs at the University of Kansas, former Director of Debate at Baylor University, and a finalist at the 1985 National Debate Tournament. Our second judge is Carly Watson, Director of Debate at Michigan State and 2010 National Debate Champion. Third judge is Rita Rosenthal from Boston College, Professor of Communication and the Director of Public Speaking. Karina Hung, Rhodes Scholar, Oxford University, and a recipient of 2 highest honors of mathematics at the undergraduate level. Having grown up winning numerous Chinese language debate competitions, she is also training as an Oxford Union British Parliament debater and local tournaments judge. And our 5th judge, Dr. Bob Cadigan, Professor of Applied Social Science at Boston University. As today's moderator, I will introduce our debaters individually, and they will adhere to their specific time limits. A digital timer will be displayed on screen, and speakers' microphones will be muted if they exceed their time limits. At the conclusion of the debate, our judges will tally up each team's cumulative point totals to determine winners of today's contest. The team of the Women's Center, the affirmative case, we have Alexi Kaliba from Northern Maine, an undergraduate at UMA with a biology and pre-med as her majors. Nicole Lamphere, Darlene George from Brooklyn, New York, a graduate of the College of New Rochelle via the Brooklyn campus, receiving her bachelor's in psychology and forensic psychology. She's also a personal certified coach. Miranda Hopkins, a first-year student at the University of Maine, majoring in justice studies with a primary focus in law. Victoria Scott, pre-law concentrated justice studies, a student with a paralegal certificate, minoring in psychology, a member of the University of Maine at Augusta Prison Education Partnership Advisory Board. And the alternate team member, Hillary Goding from Lincoln, Maine, master gardening through UMA, and just started a class through MIT. And she's also training to become a recovery coach at the Women's Center. On the Harvard's team, we have Kim T. Kundu from Los Angeles, California, Christian Gines, Anna Dean from Arkansas, Ogi Agbogu from Los Angeles, California, and Kenji Aoki from Salt Lake City, Utah. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started. All our presenters are ready. Presenting the affirmative team's first constructive argument for 7 to 9 minutes, Maine's Alexi Kaliva.
All right, she's ready. All right. As the affirmative in today's debate, we stand resolved. The U.S. Congress should enact the Paycheck Fairness Act. This speech will demonstrate in 3 contentions that wage discrimination against women is widespread and that discrimination is immoral and harmful to women's livelihoods. That the Paycheck Fairness Act will significantly reduce the wage gap. Our first contention is that gender-based pay inequality is a pervasive problem. Discrimination on the basis of sex, gender identity, and race have been a long issue in the nation's progression towards civil rights equality and continue to be a pervasive problem in our employment culture. Charlotte Burrows, chair of Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, reported in USA Today on March 16, 2022, that women who work full-time in the United States makes just a median weekly of just 83 cents for every dollar paid to men. She further notes that the pay gap is greater for women of color, with Black women just making 64 cents for every dollar paid to white non-Hispanic men, while Latinos are just paid 57 cents on every dollar. Native American women experience the greatest discrimination, and they're only paid 51 cents for every dollar compared to their white and non-Hispanic counterparts. And these figures for full-time workers underestimate the gender wage gap. The Institute for Women's Policy Research observes that the earning of part-time workers are included, the wage gap significantly widens from 83 cents to 73 cents. This wage gap is not explained by any factors other than discrimination. This argument has been debunked by numerous studies which control for other variables. Stephanie Bornstein, a University of Law professor, wrote in the Vanderbilt Law Review in 2022 that when the wage gap is adjusted for factors including education, work experience, industry, occupation, geography, and race, the gender pay gap of 8.4 to 13.5% still remains. There's also conclusive evidence that the discrimination is a significant cause to the gender wage gap. Robin Bell-Weiss of the Center of American Progression noted in 2020 that most experts attribute 38% of the wage gap to discrimination. Sarah Heiderman, a legal fellow at National Women's Law Center, argues that in 2019, that discrimination based on conscious and unconscious stereotypes is a predominant cause to the wage gap. Empirical evidence exists that when women doing exactly the same work as men are paid lower wages. Denise Cartman of the American Bar Association cites in a 2019 study by the Institute for Women's Policy Research as proof. This study examined by pay data from the Department of Labor Statistics and the 20 most common occupations where men and women performed the same jobs. It found that women were paid less in all 20 of those occupations. Our second contention is that pay disparity is morally wrong and harms women's livelihoods. Wage inequality creates an imbalance of power in our economy. No one should be elevated or diminished due to their gender. That is immoral. The wage gap creates a myriad of disadvantages for members of protected classes. These form a social economic oppression and a pervasive perpetuating cycle of poverty and intergenerational trauma. Fatima Graves, the CEO of the National Women's Law Center, testifying before Congress in March 2021, quantified the economic harm done to women with pay inequity. She noted that in 2019, the median earning for females was $10,157 less than males. That is equivalent to almost 3 months rent, 3 months of childcare costs, 3 months healthcare insurance premiums, 2 months of food security, 4 months worth of student loan payments, and 6 tanks of gas. Over the course of a 40-year career, Graves explains that the pay gap will decrease the earning of white women by $406,280, Black women will lose $986,240, and Latinos will lose $1,163,920. Inequitable pay contributes directly to women's poverty. Deborah Virgins of the American Association of University Women observes in 2019 that the gender wage gap is responsible for the greater poverty rate among women, noting that 13% of females ages 18 to 64 were living in poverty compared to 9% males. For women 65 and over, 11% in poverty were in poverty compared to 8% of men. Wage discrimination also increases the incidence of domestic abuse and intimate partner violence. In 2010, a study by Anna Iser published in the American Economic Review produces empirical evidence that the higher rate of hospitalization for domestic assault and intimate partner violence against females are caused by females victims' lower social economic status due to pay inequity. Iser's findings indicate that 9% decline of domestic violence incidents between 1990 and 2003 can be attributed to narrowing the gender wage gap within that time frame. Our third contention is solvency. The Paycheck Fairness Act will close the gender wage gap by implementing 6 major reforms of the Equal Pay Act of 1963. First, the Paycheck Fairness Act closes loopholes in the Equal Pay Act of 1963, which allows employers to justify pay disparity based on non-business rationales like alleging women have poor negotiation skills. Instead, it requires employers to justify any pay disparity based solely on the business-related justifications. Second, the Paycheck Fairness Act promotes salary transparency. The Equal Pay Act does not require salary transparency, and over 60% of private sector workers report discussing their wages is either prohibited or discouraged by employers. And women discussing these salaries face retaliation by employers. Empirical evidence shows that salary transparency will decrease the wage gap. For example, Ms. Graves argued that in the federal government, where pay rates and scales are more transparent and publicly available to employees, the overall gender wage gap is 11% lower. Third, the Paycheck Fairness Act prohibits using past salary history to determine the wages of women. Asking women for their prior salary history, which is legal now, perpetrates a cycle of discrimination. Relying on prior salary history allows a new employer to continue underpaying women whose lower salaries result from bias or discrimination by their previous employer. Pay transparency will promote wage equality. According to a Boston University analysis, the effects of the salary history ban in several states, it found that salary transparency decreased the wage gap by 8% for women and 13% for African-American women. Fourth, the Paycheck Fairness Act requires employers to report pay data by race, ethnicity, and gender to the Equal Employment Opportunity Office. According to Jenna Yang, a fellow at the Urban Institute and a former EEOC officer, formalized and institutionalized pay data reporting will encourage employers to identify and address the pay inequity on their own. Yang argues providing this data to the EEOC will shine a bright light on evidence of discrimination, enabling the EEOC to find employers. Fifth, the Paycheck Fairness Act eliminates barriers to women filing class action suits. Unlike other civil rights statutes, the Equal Pay Act requires women to opt in a class action suit. This discourages many women from opting in to avoid angering their employer. Jenna Yang says that an opt-in provision would play a valuable role in helping workers who confront pay discrimination and obtain meaningful relief. Finally, the Paycheck Fairness Act increases penalties against employers found guilty of pay discrimination. Under the Equal Pay Act, damages are capped at $50,000 for employers with 10 to 100 employees and capped at $300,000 for employers with more than 500 workers. These caps prevent women from maintaining compensation for all of their injuries. According to Graves, facilitating class action suits with robust remedies for violating equal pay laws are essential to insensitizing employers to lead the way in tackling the wage gap and to fully compensating victims of pay discrimination. Implementing the Paycheck Fairness Act will close the wage gap in a meaningful way. At the joint economic hearing held on June 9, 2021, Marilyn King, professor of economics at the University of Massachusetts, testified that the passage of the Paycheck Fairness Act will be a huge step forward for women. She noted that in her own research demonstrated that if you outlaw pay secrecy, the gender wage gap goes down. And then if you enforce non-discrimination laws, she concluded, I think you will get pretty close to parity. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexi. Providing cross-examination for the negative team for 1 to 3 minutes, Kenji Aoki.
Great. Are we ready to go?
I'm ready.
Excellent. Okay. My first question is, the AF begins with a discussion of gender-based pay. How does the Paycheck Fairness Act not only remedy pay disparities between white and Black women, but also economic inequality due to things like disparities in inheritance and structural barriers that result in things like decreased educational opportunities and employment discrimination.
So all the studies that we have and that I've pronounced in my first speech are aggregated data, which is a variety of different statistics. It is metadata that averages variations tracking inconscience on a large scale.
For sure. I guess going off of that, I want to talk a little bit more about the specific policies related to the Paycheck Fairness Act. I want to know the first or my second question is, how does that get enforced?
How does what get enforced exactly?
How does the Paycheck Fairness Act get enforced? So let's say, for example, Facebook refuses to equalize their salaries for their employees. What is the accountability mechanism that the Paycheck Fairness Act does to ensure that, Facebook would still be held liable?
So for the Paycheck Fairness Act, there will be a survey for the EEOC that will correlate with them, making sure that all the data is regulated across the state.
Sure. So the data gets collected, but then my kind of follow-up question to that is, let's say the data that gets presented still shows unequal salaries or unequal wages between people along gender, race-based lines. What does the affirmative plan do to resolve that?
So in the affirmative plan, we want to have, we want to make sure that across the scale, everyone's paid equally. So for that, the data would show that in the gap, so closing the gap will reduce poverty in women, and it'll close the wage gap that shows that there's 38% difference. So a 38% difference makes a big amount when it comes down to different pay for individuals. So across the board, we want to get them to be paid equally.
For sure. Appreciate it. My next question is, why do gender and racial pay gaps exist now?
That's kind of the question that we ask ourselves. We're not quite sure why pay isn't equal, and it should be equal across the board.
Absolutely. That makes sense. I guess my very last question is, the AF kind of ends with the distinction between I think the Equal Pay Act that was in the 1960s and then the Paycheck Fairness Act. What's the distinction between the two policies?
So being able to enact the Paycheck Fairness Act, it clarifies and strengthens the existing federal protection for women in the workforces. So it would ensure more equitable pay or equitable workplaces, and it would make sure that everything across the board is equal.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Presenting the negative team's first constructive argument for 7 to 9 minutes, Kimti Kundu.
Right. Our first argument is the counterplan. The United States federal government should implement mandatory reporting of all salaries in the US. There are two net benefits. One, the intersectionality turn, and two, the regulations turn on case. And counterplan solves better. Pay transparency would eliminate pay gaps. In 2021, Sandra Harvard, a law professor in Southern California law, wrote, a long-standing critique of feminist movement is that the issues of white women determine dominate proposals for reform. Reform efforts undertaken that disregard the multiple identities of women are less likely to meet the needs incurred by Black women and other women of color. Gender wage parity cannot be accomplished by ignoring that distinction. One question is how to incentivize employers to instill fair and transparent policies that promote wage equity and close the racialized gender gap. Congress should adopt incentives such as a pay transparency. Eradicating race and gender-based economic inequality requires the disinfectant of sunshine. Mandatory reporting would establish that employees are paid equally for the skill, effort, and responsibilities of the job. Transparent pay systems would encourage employers to develop and explain to employees the criteria on which compensation is based and to ensure that they can justify pay disparities. Denying a plaintiff's use of an intersectional framework limits the possibilities for her being able to prove the extent of the discriminatory conduct. Our second argument is the intersectionality turn. The Paycheck Fairness Act treats women as a homogeneous group, ignoring race and class-based differences. A gender lens that ignores intersectional oppression cannot solve for inequality. In the manuscript of Black Woman in Politics, Julia Zachary and Soldia Wilson emphasize intersectionality is employed to deconstruct categories of gender that are used to frame that fair pay / fair equity debate. Black feminist scholars have long challenged that generalization around identity markers. Differences exist among distinct race and classes of women. Higginbotham's work reveals how Black women, regardless of the socioeconomic status, were excluded from the dominant society's definition of lady, and how gender identity of Black women are explicitly linked to and determined by racial identity. Certain differences result in race, class, and gender cannot be separated into single entities. Different experiences of women should be specific to class and gender status and not generalized or grouped into one category. Black women and other marginalized individuals are kept in subordinate positions that reinforce negative stereotypes and their inequitable social positions. One of the first instances was during slavery, when courts ruled woman outside of the statutory rubric for desperate treatment of women of different racial groups, even in labor forces. Scholars contend that Black women were never equal to their white female counterparts. Policymakers continue to treat women as a homogeneous population. This focuses on women as a homogeneous group is problematic because it addresses their interests of only one group of women, white and middle class. Such an approach fails to recognize intergroup. In promoting gender neutrality, there is a failure to recognize how race and class influence women's experiences in the paid labor force. B, only intersectional solutions can solve. Parity in slavery on gender lines is insufficient. In the Yale Journal of Law and Feminism 2019, Storm discusses, because a person does not experience oppressions or the privileged discreetly, but simultaneously, women of color often have unique intersectional experiences. Intersectional problems require intersectional solutions. It is not sufficient to advocate for the salary parity, policies that benefit women as a monolith. A comprehensive and multifaceted solution that is also intersectional will better address the broad impacts of gender wage gap, including its implications of women's access to housing, education, and credit. Any efforts to close the gender pay gap should address not just the processes that perpetuate gender discrimination, but also the mechanisms that produce racial inequalities. Advocates should promote intersectional solutions that improve the outcomes for all women. And C framework, you should prioritize solutions that meaningfully address intersectional oppression. With the rise of far-right fascism and CRT bans throughout the US, combating structural oppression must take priority. And racial turns. One, Paycheck Fairness Act allows them limited punitive damages and would actually discourage firms from hiring women. In 2020, Independent Women's Forum, Romania Boca argued that lifting the cap on punitive and compensatory damages provides lawyers with an incentive to bring forth many potentially frivolous lawsuits. Removing statutory caps will provide an incentive to increase lawsuits. This rises in liability employers face when employees hiring women. As consequence, employers fearful of the prospects of costly litigation to defend against pay-based lawsuits, many avoid hiring women. This law will force employers to spend more time and resources on litigation. 2, PFA fails. Legal system bias against women will still cause judges to rule against plaintiffs. The plan can't change that. And B, conservative judges will find ways to avoid filling recent abortion decisions, prove that they ignore And 3, PFA establishes too many regulatory burdens. Bonkia went on to add in 2010 that Paycheck Fairness Act would burden businesses with more regulations and more extensive framework paperwork requirements. Reporting requirements would impose unnecessary administrative costs on businesses to track employees. The burden would disproportionately affect small businesses. Employee information would have to be tracked manually, taking away time from productive activities. And 4, enforcement fails. Large companies will still pay for the fines, and they are likely to win the cases with better lawyers. And 5, turn PFA, it makes racist hiring worse. Instead of paying women and people of color equally, companies would not hire them or will keep people of color in lower positions. Rachel Getzler, a senior research fellow of the Heritage Foundation in 2019, said with emphasis that instead of higher pay, women and minorities likely find harder to get their foot in the door. Employers would be more reticent to hire women and minorities since they automatically include in future gender or race-based class action lawsuits. And that concludes my time.
Thank you. Providing cross-examination for the affirmative team for 1 to 3 minutes. Victoria Scott.
Hello, Kimti. I have a couple of questions for you. It sounds like your counterplan takes a couple of pages out of our playbook. So how does your counterplan diverge from our affirmative proposal?
So specifically, we look into the intersectionality aspect and how that could be truly beneficial to addressing sort of the broad range of disparities that women of color, women in multiple societies, or women in different age range, different pay, socioeconomic standings can face. It looks into those intersectionalities to determine ways in which women are affected uniquely, not as a homogenized group, to provide distinct ways of addressing essentially issues of equity or issues of disparities that are not faced or experienced similarly by all women.
Thank you. Do current employment laws currently exist to address issues of race in the workplace?
We're saying that the current employment laws that are there often fall into the same traps of only highlighting one group of women, which we've isolated as white women in middle class societies who already have certain advantages that other women do not have. So therefore, they're already able to address those issues while leaving behind other women, such as women of color that we've highlighted, to have unique issues that are unaddressed or go unaddressed. And those.
Thank you. I actually have another question about that. Would a racially focused counterplan equalize pay between men and women of ethnic demographics?
Yep, that's why we look into this intersectionality range. It not only incorporates like race and class-based differences, but also looks into gender as a part of that intersectional identity, understanding that women and even like men come from intersectional backgrounds. So it can take into account measures to make a more equitable standing for women. And if that necessitates sort of revisit of what that looks like for men versus women, then that's also inclusive of that intersectional lens that the counterplan forwards.
Great, thank you. You asserted that employers will punish women and minorities if the Paycheck Fairness Act is enacted. Do you think that they'd be willing to violate existing employment law out of spite if this is passed?
I think we would have to point to which laws we're discussing specifically. I think the regulations turn does a well job of explaining how we're able to sort of mitigate the failures of PFA by having legal systems that are able to specifically point out when these biases occur and say or take actions against those actions that would avoid sort of, having issues.
Thank you. It was sounding like you were saying that they'd be willing to violate existing equal opportunity employment law if this was enacted.
We're saying that those issues would be best discussed, and the regulations turn explains how those issues that we're focusing on be resolved through that counterplan.
So if they were so willing to violate that, what is the likelihood that they're not already committing acts of discrimination in the workplace?
I would say that, first of all, having another method in place, including inclusivity, would allow us to.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both. Presenting the negative team's first rebuttal for 4 to 6 minutes, Christian Gynes.
Everybody here, all right?
Yep.
They said- During the questioning period, my teammate Kenji Aoki asked them a crucial question, which was, why does the wage gap and discrimination exist within the world currently? And the affirmative responded that they don't know, which is the worst concession in this debate, because if we win a root cause argument, we win this debate, which we will get to with our intersectionality turn. We can show that through racialized slavery, colonialism, and modern humanism, which arose to create otherized bodies, the economy and the gender pay gap is configured around this racial, sexual, and economic and political difference, establishing that tethering point that is determined by an erasure of difference. Thus, the desire for pay for equity, while seemingly logical and good on face value, reproduces more violence than it solves for, because it doesn't get to the root cause of the issue, which is the intersectionality of gender, racial, and sexual difference. And thus the desire for the Paycheck Fairness Act, which my teammate was talking about, is a desire to be equivalent with the ultimate figure of the human, which is the figure of the white man. And through the logic, creates one of difference without getting to the structural root cause of the reason why pay isn't fair in the first place, which is at the intersection of race and gender and how colonialism and slavery arose. Because this logic and desire continues to reproduce the same logics that caused slavery and colonialism and its multitudes of violence to arise, which is the desire to be white. Thus, the law is birthed from that system of sameness that systematically consumes and disposes of those categories of difference: anti-Blackness, patriarchy, ableism, capitalism. Thus, in regards to the law, Black women and other marginalized groups are seen as a paradoxical conundrum that cannot be grappled with under the affirmative plans, which means they will continue to reproduce that violence. I implore you to think back to the 19th Amendment, which made it illegal to deny the right to vote to any citizen based on their sex, which effectively granted women the right to vote. And it was first introduced in 1878, and it was finally certified 42 years later. But despite this, Black women still weren't allowed to vote, which shows how racism overwrites the experiences of anyone who isn't white, and how only through an approach of intersectionality can solve, which I would also point you to when we're looking at the Equal Pay Act, because when this was enacted, Black women were still paid less than white women, because gender cannot solely explain the reason why Black women suffer, and it's not solely gender oppression, but it's also racialized. Thus, the affirmative fails, because Paycheck Fairness Act doesn't solve it, only increases penalties for companies, but doesn't address the ways in which legal profession excludes perspectives of Black women, and an intersectional approach that begins with pay transparency is better. According to Lucretia McAllister and How the Gender Pay Gap Affects Black Women in Law in 2020, she says that for Black women in the legal profession, pay secrecy may continue to work against them because the law does not apply to the public sector. Not knowing what your coworker makes, the places the onus on the employee instead of the employer. The employee is abdicated of the initial responsibility of paying equitable wages. And the Paycheck Fairness Act was written to amend the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 to provide more effective remedies to victims of discrimination in the payment of wages. And one important distinction in the Paycheck Fairness Act is the presence of enhanced penalties. Penalties, both compensatory and punitive, involve the company giving the government the very thing they refuse to give to Black women. Along with equal pay, the idea of equal opportunity must also be considered. Black women do not have a place in the courtroom, as a judge, and their pay cannot even come into question. Thus, the failure to be intersectional means a failure to solve, because McAllister also says that intersectionality is a framework for conceptualizing a person, group of people, or social problem as affected by a number of discrimination disadvantages. And because the intersectional experience is greater than the sum of racism and sexism, an analysis that does not take intersectionality into account cannot sufficiently address the particular manner in which Black women are subordinated, because gender is always race and race is always gender. Thus, we solve better, which is mutually exclusive with the AF. And this is according to Julia S. Jordan Zachary and Celinda Wilson in 2014, because employing an essentialist understanding of the way pay equity will prove insufficient if and when applied to policy development. It is for this reason we propose an intersectional approach. An intersectional approach would center the lives of the experiences of women regardless of social location and account for recognized difference between and among groups of women. And discursive structure and rhetorical devices are an integral part of the process of crafting an intersectional policy approach. And policy grounded in intersectional strategies will begin to offer a more comprehensive approach to addressing labor and forced discrimination. Now, the affirmative team likes to make the claims about solving for discrimination within the wage gap, and you will hear arguments later about not letting perfect be the enemy of good, but we're not even forwarding a perfect analysis, but we've showed how their intersectional analysis only helps white women, because one, their claims of Black, Latinos, and Native American women wouldn't be solved, because race wouldn't be an arbiter for evaluating that discrimination, and two, they say that the wage gap is morally wrong. And yes, we will agree with that, but they don't structurally do anything to change this imbalance, because right now people are impoverished and done wrong by the economy. But that is because, like I said earlier, the economy runs off these racial and gender and sexual differences. And their last point on solvency says that transparency solves. But I ask you, Judge, when has the knowledge of violence actually caused a reduction of violence, especially when these billion-dollar corporations have infinite money to spend in these lawsuits? So while closing the loopholes from 1963, giving salary transparency, and prohibiting past salary history, this doesn't solve the root cause of the issue, which is the current structure of the economy. And finally, if they cannot provide a genealogy of how and why the gender wage gap function, then we will be winning a root cause argument, which decks any solvency of the affirmative, which means that you will be voting for the negative in this round. Thank you.
Thank you. Presenting the affirmative team's first rebuttal for 4 to 6 minutes, Nicole Lanther.
To start. First, I'd like to start with your counterplan. It should be rejected, for your counterplan does not solve loopholes. Your counterplan does not require data reporting, which is essential to correcting this problem. The counterplan does nothing to increase penalties on employers who engage in unequal pay practices, nor does it put anything in place to address class action lawsuits. Furthermore, it does not eliminate pay secrecy, and it also does nothing to improve enforcement. So the counterplan is not sufficient. Your counterplan of cross-sectionality distracts from issues of protections of female experiencing wage discrimination, because males and females of all races are paid unequally. White men are receiving higher wages than white women. Black men are paid more than Black women, and so on. Our plan treats women as a class in order to concentrate efforts so that female interests are promoted and protected, which will benefit minority women and will be a necessary step in order to create not only gender pay, but racial equality. We talked about salary transparency. It's not enough on its own. Salary transparency is a great idea, and yes, it will help in closing the wage gap, but the problem is implementation. Who is to say that all states would adopt the same laws for salary transparency? So we need a federal plan to ensure wage equality for all. Not only that, you talked about protective classes. The provisions of the Paycheck Fairness Act will implement protections. It will expand the protected classes to include pregnancy, sexual orientation, gender identity, and sexual characteristics. You also talk about litigation and lawsuits. According to Deborah Thompson Eisenberg, Associate Professor of Law at the University of Maryland, a third of lawsuits don't get past summary judgments, which means 2/3 don't even make it to litigation. Furthermore, provisions of the Paycheck Fairness Act will help to motivate and correct unjustified pay disparities before they turn into lawsuits. Also, I'd also like to point out, if there was no discrimination based on the factor of sex, there would be no reason to pursue litigation in the first place. Lawyers do not take on cases that are not winnable. We talk about harms of small business. The Paycheck Fairness Act does not impose harmful burdens on businesses. Patricia Renfro, American Bar Association president, says April 13th, 2021, the Paycheck Fairness Act does not alter the basic scheme of this statute. It imposes unreasonable burdens on employers. The majority of its proposed changes are borrowed from other civil rights statutes that have proved more than effective in eradicating workplace discrimination. Not only that, small businesses, the Paycheck Fairness Act provides assistance for small businesses. Talked about costly burdens. According to Jocelyn Fry, Senior Fellow of American Center of Progress, employer complaints that routine data collection is overtly difficult and some is an insult to our technological capabilities in the American workforce. Employers already regularly maintain pay data, and many are already obligated to submit such data. Further, I'd like to say in closing that I would just like to say that enacting the Paycheck Fairness Act is an opportunity for Congress to strengthen the Equal Pay Act. It bolsters the rights of working women and put an end to the gender-based wage disparity once and for all. The Paycheck Fairness Act would require employers to prove that pay disparities exist for legitimate reasons, ban retaliation against workers who discuss their wages, allow more workers to participate in class action lawsuits against systemic pay discrimination, prohibit employers from seeking the salary history of prospective employees, and develop a wage data collection system to provide a system of business and to provide a system to businesses to improve equal pay practices.
Thank you, Nicole. We've now reached the halfway point of the debate, leading us in opening the second round by presenting the negative team's second constructive argument for 6 to 8 minutes. Harvard's Anna Dean.
Okay, can you all hear me? Yes. Hello? 1 second. Hello? Okay, I think we're good now. Okay. So the affirmative just came up here and talked a lot about how we don't solve through different loopholes, thinking specifically about class action lawsuits and things of that nature. But what it's imperative for us to look at in today's debate is that a policy that we're passing has to be a good policy. We shouldn't just be passing policy to pass it. We must be critical with all policy that we're passing in today's debate. The plan and their plan makes it actually harder to further income equality intersectionally, and it's worse than the status quo. So the first thing that we need to look at today is specifically framing the debate. Our framing of the debate is key because discourse matters. We view this debate and we urge everyone to view this debate through an intersectional approach. Discourse matters. Recognition of differences within the category of woman is necessary for liberation, and the failure to incorporate complexity can result in even more oppression. That's our Jordan and Zachary evidence from Providence College. She argues that the recognition of differences within the category of woman is an act of liberation. A Black feminist approach of policy analysis allows us to see how discourse designed to liberate can actually result in oppression. In the current discussion on pay equity, previous existing hierarchies among and within groups of women are rendered invisible, even as an official punitively works to dismantle wage discrimination. Failing to recognize the more complex levels of class, race, and gender hierarchies make for simplified policy deliberation, but does not, of course, render them any less potent within lives of women. Indeed, while all women in theory and in practice are affected by the wage gap, it does not affect all women equally. Differences resulting from the factors such as race, ethnicity, class, and age, among others, influence a woman's experiences within the labor force and discrimination. Frames influence policymaking, and an intersectional approach works better. That's our Jordan and Zachary evidence from Providence College. It says that recognizing variations between and within groups of women in the policymaking process can enhance the effectiveness of policies targeting women. To frame it is to select some aspects of perceived reality and make them more salient in communicating text in such a way to promote a particular problem definition. Our focus is on describing how diversity via these rhetorical devices is recognized in the policy process via the framing of fair pay and pay equity, and how the effectiveness of the policy is enhanced or lessened by ignoring differences between and within groups of women. The negative is key because the PFA doesn't have an intersectional approach. They cannot prove how the PFA is intersectional because it's not. PFA abandons intersectional analysis. It classifies women as a homogeneous group and ignores disproportionate inequalities of women of color. In the policymaking process, the lived experiences of marginalized and minoritized women can be ignored by classifying women as a homogeneous group, therefore operating from a position of gender equality and neutrality. As in the case of pay equity, there seems to be a tendency to construct Black women as comparable, and indeed the same as the white counterparts. Meanwhile, ignored and often masked are the disproportionate inequalities experienced by Black women. The PFA fails the intersectionality test. Black women, for example, would have their pay compared to Black men, not white men, further entrenching inequality in the status quo. Women of color are paid less than men and other women because of the intersection of sex and racial discrimination. Many courts refuse to recognize the intersection of race and sex discrimination and women of color face. Women of color who challenge pay disparities are compared with their male counterparts, not with white men who are making the most. These gaps in civil rights laws allow unequal pay to continue. Race-neutral laws and analysis make discrimination against women of color invisible. This reinforces the legal system's inability to see intersectional oppression, and that's that's why we cannot pass the PFA. The PFA assumes that there's a unitary experience of gender. While gender equity is exonerated as an objective in this frame, it fails to recognize gendered realities that are race and class. Embedded in this frame is essentialism as points of departure is experiences of specific groups of women and men. The failure to recognize intra-group differences can also result in a blanket type of approach to address inequality, not only because men and women, but across women of different groups. And that's why we cannot pass the PFA. Specifically, looking at the counterplan is key because reporting solves. This is our year-by 2019 evidence. Placing the burden of proof on employers to show that unequal pay is based on qualifications or workload, the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission should adopt this mandatory reporting process and shift the burden of proof to the employer. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission also needs to consider unequal pay based on sex and race in this process. Their plan makes it harder to actually further income equality overall. And we have to be critical with policy making and passing. As I was talking about earlier, we shouldn't just be passing policy to pass it, but we need to specifically pass policy that is going to be effective. Unemployment would increase in the short term. This is the Boca 2010 evidence from the unintended consequences of the Paycheck Fairness Act. Specifically, comparable worth guidelines with artificially raise the wages in some occupations might lead to a higher unemployment in those occupations. Relatively higher wages are going to increase competitions for those jobs, leaving many more interested applicants unemployed. Issuing information collection requirements on employee pay by sex, race, and national origin imposes an unnecessary costly burden on employers. It could lead to a shortage of qualified candidates for high demand positions and would create distortions of the labor market, thereby rendering our economy less effective. Furthermore, when we're looking at specifically how race neutral laws and analyses make discrimination against women of color invisible, and it reinforces legal systems' inability to see this intersectional oppression. Women of color who challenge pay disparities are compared with their male counterparts, not with white men who are making the most in the status quo. And that's why it's imperative to look at the lack of dedicated remedies for pay inequalities on grounds of race and disability, and how this included the material disadvantage experienced by Black and minority ethnic women, and women with disabilities are prevented as an intersectional approach to pay inequities more broadly. The effect of this has been, in terms of legal remedies, that sex discrimination and unequal pay, the distinctive experiences of Black women, are to this day still rendered invisible by law's inability to see or address intersectionality. And overall, it's imperative that we view this debate and view the PFA by framing how discourse matters and how an intersectional approach is imperative. When we're specifically looking at the recognition of differences within the category of woman, we see that women aren't going to be liberated through the PFA, and it fails to incorporate such complex forms of oppression like how race influences this, and it actually is really bad policymaking. And I urge everyone in this debate to think about how we shouldn't be passing policy just to pass policy. Rather, we need to be creating policy that actually makes the status quo better and not worse.
Thank you. All right, presenting the affirmative team's second constructive argument for 6 to 8 minutes, Maine's Darlene George.
Good afternoon, everybody. So let's hear some hard truths today. In this speech, I will make 4 arguments to support the desirability of enacting the Paycheck Fairness Act. First, the Paycheck Fairness Act will improve women's salary negotiating skills. Currently, stereotypical gender roles create barriers for women to negotiate an equitable salary with their employers. Female assertiveness in employment context is often interpreted through a gender-biased lens as aggressive or disagreeable. When the same behavior in interview processes or salary negotiations is celebrated for men, a man who plays hardball in negotiations is a go-getter, where a woman would be seen as difficult to work with, or perhaps a more colorful description, not fit for print. According to Harvard Business School Assistant Professor Julian Slakteev and colleagues, April 2021, when a woman with a strong outside option, such as a job offer from another company, is negotiating, the likelihood that the discussion will end in an impasse nearly triples, regardless of whether she's negotiating with a man or a woman. Imagine that. It's bad enough that women have to contend with men for equal pay and jobs. However, it is worse for Black, Indigenous, Indigenous and people of color to obtain a job that pays enough to cover the rent, food, and the monthly utilities. Women out of sheer necessity will take a job that pays so much less than men to keep a roof over their heads and the kids fed. The ability to negotiate is almost non-existent because of their circumstances. The Paycheck Fairness Act establishes a grant program that will train women in negotiating skills so that they are not disadvantaged when it comes to contract agreements for employment, salary, or benefits. Not only will this proactively combat discrimination, but further promises to increase opportunities for mentorship and promotions within the organization, which not only helps close the gap, but will narrow the opportunity gap as well. Second, the Paycheck Fairness Act will alleviate family poverty. Charlotte Burrows, chair of the EEOC, stated in 2022 that closing the pay gap will reduce the poverty rate for working women by 50% and lift more than 2.5 million children out of poverty. Poverty remains a serious problem for working women and their families. In 2019, 1 in 9 women were living in poverty. For women of color, the rates of poverty remain shamefully high. 18% for Native American, 18% for Black, and 15% for Latinas. Poverty has many harmful consequences, including causing health problems and premature death. A study published in the December 2022 issue of Health Affairs argued there was definitive evidence, both correlational and causal, to demonstrate that low income results in greater incidence of disease and shorter lifespans. The study also found with every increment of income by $15,000, health risk decreases. Poverty is also a major factor in the escalating crime rate by women. According to a 2021 policy brief by Working Chance, the most common crimes that women are arrested for, namely theft and fraud, are related to poverty. Moreover, 38% of women committed the offense out of the need to support their children. Sadly, mothers are stealing or selling drugs merely to put food on the table or to keep a roof over their families' heads. According to the Prison Policy Initiative 2018, nationwide women's state prison populations grew 834% over nearly 40 years. Again, 834%. That's more than double the amount of men. According to an MDOC end of the year report in 2022, 49% of women were incarcerated for drug trafficking, opposed to 29% of men. The mass incarceration of women in state prison is a tragedy for their children. Statistics shows that 58% of women in prison are a parent of a minor child, and 52% of them were living with their children at the time of their arrest. Separating children from their mothers perpetuates a cycle of poverty and disadvantage. Leah Wang, research analyst at the Prison Policy Initiative, noted in 2022 that children of incarcerated parents face formidable cognitive and health-related challenges throughout their development. She also indicated that many of these children commit crimes and get incarcerated. Third, the Paycheck Fairness Act will enhance the lifetime economic security of women. Senior Vice President of Public Policy and Research, Deborah Vigans from the American Association of University Women, testified that because women are typically paid less than men during working years, women receive less income from Social Security, pensions, and other sources when they retire than men do. Other benefits such as disability and life insurance are also smaller for women because these benefits are usually based on earnings. In my professional life, I was a retirement business analyst for 15 years for a prestigious financial retirement company. While performing my daily duties, about 65% of my clients were men and 35% were women. And I have to say that the balance in the accounts differed significantly. While the men had $500,000 or more, the women barely had $100,000. The numbers were even more disproportionate when compared to other ethnic groups of Black, Brown, Latino, Native American, and Pacific Islanders. When it came to the amount of money in accounts of women of color and Caucasian, the difference was anywhere between $50,000 to $100,000. According to the United States Census Bureau SIPP study in 2020, men were 47.8% more likely than women to own a retirement account in 2020. The ADP Research Institute study analyzes payroll data from 13 million employees from 30,000 firms across 8 sectors in the United States. Just guess what the study uncovered? That the pay difference between men and women persists across all levels. Again, all levels of management. The Paycheck Fairness Act levels the playing field by ensuring that women are receiving equal pay that will result in greater retirement and Social Security benefits. Fourth, the Paycheck Fairness Act will boost the U.S. economy for the benefit of everyone. Closing the gender wage gap will have a significant positive effect on the overall U.S. economy. Women are responsible for making 3/4 of consumer purchasing decisions. They play a vital role in determining the level of economic activity. Today, pay inequity is depressing economic activity. Representative Donald Bayer testified before Congress on June 9th, 2021, that women's lost wages due to pay inequity is decreasing economic output by $541 billion per year, which translates to a reduction in gross domestic product by 2.8%. Conversely, if women receive comparable pay to men, that will boost the wages of working women, leading to a big surge in consumer spending. According to the Harvard Business Review in 2009, as a market, women represent an opportunity bigger than China and India combined. They control 20 trillion in consumer spending, and that figure could reach 28 trillion in the next 5 years. Women drive the world economy. An economy cannot operate at its full potential if half of its population cannot fully contribute to it. Too many women are locked out of economic opportunities because of the unfair pay wages, which is not only unfair, but also harms growth and resilience for all. When we pay women less than men, we're telling women their work isn't as valuable. We're all equally valuable and we should be paid equally.
Thank you, Darlene. Presenting the affirmative team's second rebuttal for 3 to 5 minutes, Maine's Miranda Hopkins.
I'm going to negate the contentions made by the negative and give you an honest view of what is the truth, as the affirmative has previously detailed here for you today. These are the facts of the Paycheck Fairness Act. This is a debate not about discrimination. It's about discrimination for all women and not a particular group. Did you not hear our statistics and speeches? All of our calculations for ethnic women were compared to white men. Control factors protect minority women, creating data documentation and legal recourse with adequate damage when there is gender and racial wage disparity. Black women are paid less than Black men, even though their background suggests they should be paid more. Deborah J. Vaggins, Senior Vice President of Public Policy and Research from the American Association of University Women in 2019 said, the intersectional impact of race and gender bias contributes to all over the gender pay gap. In other words, when closely examining the impact of race and gender, as well as other factors on the pay of Black men, Black women, and white women, it is clear that Black women experience a large gap that cannot be attributed to other observable characteristics, such as occupation and education, or by race or gender separately. Black women's education and other labor force characteristics are now such that they would be expected to be paid more than Black men if gender bias were not a factor, yet they're still paid less. The wage gap affects everyone. Sarah David Heidman, legal fellow, the National Women's Law Center, and Andrea Johnson, senior counsel for state policy at the National Women's Law Center, said in 2019, gender wage gap persists in all 50 states, and it is in nearly every occupation. Significant wage gap also exists for mothers compared to fathers, LGBTQ women compared with men, and women with disabilities compared to men with disabilities. The Paycheck Fairness Act is for all women. The affirmative is not willing to weigh any woman over another. Now let us rein this back into the Paycheck Fairness Act. There is no counter plan that is worthy of the Paycheck Fairness Act. Fatima Gross Graves, the CEO of the National Women's Law Center in 2019 stated that only federal law provides legal protections to all Americans. Research consistently shows equal pay is a priority for voters. And the Me Too movement has only heightened public attention to the gender wage gap and increased demand for solutions. States, cities, and some companies have been spurred to take action by this cultural shift. But it is not enough for some states to act and for some employees to take voluntary steps to close the gender wage gap. The Paycheck Fairness Act would also benefit businesses, particularly those with operations in multiple jurisdictions. It will create a baseline national standard, providing consistency for companies as they develop and implement compensation structures and pay practices across the country. The threat of litigation floodgates and frivolous lawsuits is nothing but smoke and mirrors. Deborah Thompson Eisenberg, Associate Professor of Law at the University of Maryland in 2014, said filing frivolous law cases will not keep the lights on in their offices. The idea that attorneys would put their law licenses and reputations on the line by filing frivolous cases, and that our smart federal judges would allow these frivolous cases to proceed to a jury, and then juries would award astronomical damages for unmerited claims. This is a fantastical red herring. Harvard, I thank you for this one. An article by Marianne Culo in the Harvard Journal on Legislation in 2013 wrote this: the concept that women whose jobs are different from those who are performed by male employees should nonetheless be compensated on a comparable basis with those male employees if the women's jobs were of comparable value to their employers. Furthermore, without a mandatory wage gap law, it will be impossible to completely close the gap, as there will never be a way to thoroughly ferret out all remaining wage discrimination. Instead, enforcement of the equal pay laws will continue to be a piecemeal and erratic, driven by inadvertent discoveries of wage inequities. This is a united bill to protect everyone. Leave discrimination in 1964.
Thank you. Presenting the negative team's second rebuttal for 3 to 5 minutes, Harvard's Oge Abago.
Can everyone hear me? Amazing. This is not a debate about if we should get rid of discrimination or the pay gap. The negative has agreed that this is a problem that must be discussed and resolved. This means that all their arguments and evidence about current inequality and disparities all flows negative, because we are winning the root cause to why there is such discrimination occurring across the board, despite that discrimination and pay inequality is already illegal through the Civil Rights Act and the Equal Pay Act. This is the debate about how we think about policy and law to diminish the potential for perpetuating structural problems in law by being critical about the legal solutions we suggest. The negative has posited the intersectional discussions, and using Black feminist studies allows us to deconstruct if we win root cause to poverty, domestic violence, and abuse, we win that humanism is the root cause for structural inequality in the economy and law, including the pay gap. We win this debate because it means that the law proposed by the affirmative will lead to more discrimination, larger gaps in the future, making it harder for women and women of color and Black women to access and demand equal pay. The question you ask is not, are women paid the same as men, but are women paid the same as other women? Are Black women being paid the same as white women? How does the affirmative resolve this? You should prioritize intersectional solutions. With the rise of banning of critical race theory and fascism amongst multiple states, this makes it harder for us to discuss intersectionality and structural violence, which means that you must prioritize this in the ways in which you view your ballot. Extend our framing argument of humanism. We have indicted that humanist policies that attempt to assume and make monolithic groups of people perpetuates discrimination, and this is how the law perpetuates structural inequality despite progress occurring. This explains all of their examples of why women are seen as aggressive, while men assertive. It also means that their analysis of comparing all women to just white men proves how desires to be closer to white men prevents us from seeing the inequality within women themselves, such as that gap between different intersections of women, which will further perpetuate the pay gap amongst Black women because of the monolithicizing of the category of women. This furthers our argument that we must be aware that passing policies just to pass it does not mean it's good policy. When we are not critical of these policies, we pass it allows for further forms of discrimination, as seen with the 19th Amendment, as we talked about before, and with the Equal Pay Act. The plan asserts equal pay, but when we ask about the mechanisms that these things are enforced, there's no clear construct of what it means for a Black woman to say we are being you're not being paid equally. What does it mean if just Facebook can just pay you off and then fire you the next day? The homogenization of women in the plan text of the affirmative demonstrates the lack of intersectional approach that allows for the slippages that lead to Black women not having access to equal pay despite the 19th Amendment. Black women getting compared to Black men. This was done by the affirmative in their speech when they say that white men get paid more than white women. they say that Black men get played more than Black women proves how race overcoats the harmonization of race, even though race is a factor that continues to prevent equal pay for Black women to their white counterparts. Act does not do anything to change the structural conditions that format this, which is our first rebuttal speech. Their claims of Black, Latino, and Native American women couldn't be resolved by the affirmative because race wouldn't be an arbiter for evaluating discrimination. When they say that we only compare things to white men, this is the exact problem, that white men being the arbiter of what it means to be a good citizen or be a good worker is always going to be the comparative that means that we can never actually exist within the first place, because that's how these problems continue themselves. We control the root cause. Humanist politics justifies education gaps between women of color and Black women. Look at when integration happened, we immediately see white flight because there's still structural antagonisms that allow for these problems to reproduce themselves, when currently now, even though we have integration, school systems are more segregated now than they were even back in the 60s. Generational factors of Black women not having access to generational wealth and property as well impacts access to education and job security due to lack of generational credit that formats our economy. Black women are less likely to get promoted in their jobs. This will be the loophole, as companies will justify not paying Black women or women of color or women in general more by saying that they do not have the same job, so they don't have to be paid the same, because instead men will simply be promoted more, and also white women are more likely to hold better jobs than Black women. The question is, why are these things happening? And it's a question of not if the affirmative is a step in the right direction, but is the affirmative simply a restructuring of the same things that the legal system has already done in its past? When we look at things such as the Civil Rights Act that asserted that it's illegal for racism, sexism, forms of discrimination to exist in the workplace or any other facility, the question you need to ask yourself as judges is, why are we still seeing problems? Why are we still seeing discrimination, especially when the affirmative has already conceded that discrimination is the root cause has conceded that discrimination is the main cause for pay gap happening. This is what they said in their constructive speech. It means that all your priority of the ballot has to ask yourself, is the affirmative's plan of monolithizing a woman as a gender category capable of resolving the pay gap, when we have said that discrimination is occurring because of humanist politics, the ways in which we have prioritized white men that allows us for actually recognizing the ways in which Black women are not even equal to white women, etc., because of the intersections of race. You should prioritize racial analysis and Black feminist theory as a way to understand the ways that the structural impacts happen, which is why you're going to vote for the negative.
Thank you. Now both teams will present closing remarks for 90 seconds, beginning with Maine's Victoria Scott.
Thank you. The counterplan introduced by the negative conveniently acts as a sleight of hand with the trending topic of intersectionality to scatter the efforts and energy that separates women with segregated subclasses rather than unifying and empowering them. They use the buzzword monolith quite a bit, but I don't know if y'all got to look at my table over there. We have women representing every color, every walk of life, many socioeconomic classes, with the common and collective experience of being a woman. We don't have competition over here. We're not infighting amongst ourselves, because we can relate to each other on this level and support and uplift each other the way that we should be as women, instead of fighting for our individual interests and separating ourselves and picking out the differences. I see myself in each one of these women, and I hope that they see me in them. I am so proud of everyone here today. We've been through enough, and there are a lot of shared experiences that women have that they need to be able to comfort each other over, and to be able to protect each other from discrimination from outside forces who seek to subjugate and oppress them. This is a terrible thing, but I just hope that we can start to focus on the fact that this is a stepping stone to create equality in the workplace for genders, instead of causing more split factions, more distractions, and to get absolutely nothing done the way that it hasn't been done. The negative has already agreed with us on several fronts that this is necessary, that this is a problem. It's just a matter of how we're implementing this. And I think that their strategy will fail because it doesn't take the common unified approach that we need to be successful. And that is why the affirmative should win today. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear final words from Harvard's Kenji Aoki.
First, it's been an honor to have these important discussions about equity with the women of MDOC, and I hope to honor this commitment by debating to my best. You should vote neg because equal pay is an ineffective plan to address unequal circumstances. The Paycheck Fairness Act is another instance of historic colorblindness, denying other structural economic disparities stemming from unequal education, housing, credit, and generational wealth, which cut along racial and gendered lines, as already eloquently explained by Oge, Anna, Christian, and Kim T. Salary parity at best equally lifts everyone up exactly one rung on a ladder of a sinking ship, but maintaining that people now exist on different rungs, which means that there will still be communities that drown first in the wake of the Paycheck Fairness Act. Independent of winning a counterplan, voting neg telegraphs that now is not the time for the lesser of two evils, and we should refuse to settle until greater political and intersectional demands are made. There are two final arguments which zero the possibility for you all wonderful judges to vote F as an intersectional or beneficial policy. One, corporations, instead of equalizing pay for minorities, will simply refuse to hire them. 1NC BOCHA evidence reminds us that since companies are liability averse, to prevent women or people of color to negotiate their salaries, companies instead will just not hire them, since they will revoltingly but inevitably believe that they aren't worth the financial investment in a world of the ass. Second, even if they are hired, they will be confined to lower paying jobs as a loophole to maintain wage gaps, which means the plan cements hierarchies rather than remedying them.
Thank you. This now concludes the debate portion of our contest, and while we await the judges' final score tabulation, I'd like to thank both our teams for their hard work and willingness to collaborate and personify the power of education. No matter what the judges decide, I think we can all agree this was an exemplary display of human talent and capacity. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Executive Director Daniel Throop.
Thank you very much, Brittany. It is great to be able to draw this debate to a close. And while the judges tabulate their scores, we'd like to hear from our participants about this experience, because this is such a unique sociological exchange of not just intellectual ideas on a very complex economic and social policy issue, as you just heard described in great detail from both teams. But again, we're building human bridges here across walls. And I want everyone who's watching to understand that it is not easy to open prison doors. And with that, I'd like to thank our partners within Maine DOC for having the progressive leadership, not only in promoting the power of education to transform human lives and quality of life, both inside those walls and beyond, but also in allowing the National Prison Debate League to operate within this space and to build these sort of bridges to display the humanity and the talent and the intellectual capacity and the redemptive power that people all do possess, and that sometimes doesn't get seen because those walls not only keep people in, they do a lot to keep people out. And you got to see a glimpse of the human talent that exists within these spaces. And that's what we love to amplify. And we love to be able to share this space with our collegiate partners. But I have to applaud the progressive leadership of Maine DOC, from Commissioner Randall Liberty to Deputy Commissioner Anthony Cantillo to Anna Black, Tricia Flanders, Philip Patoco, and all of the individuals at Maine DOC, including our wonderful participants who agreed to go on this leap with us. None of them had debate experience prior to this. And here they are today debating Harvard University. And I just can't highlight that enough, because this has been a journey for these individuals, and really respect the fact that they were willing to put themselves out there and again, walk through the doors that have been opened for everyone here today, and hopefully the minds that everyone here just helped to open as well. I don't think that can be overstated. So I'm going to allow people to speak for themselves, and I'd love to hear from a representative of the women's team from Maine, if someone would voluntarily like to just maybe take the lectern and give us your thoughts in real time here of what this experience was for you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad it's over, but this has definitely been a journey. I can definitely tell you this is not something I would have picked to do on my own. My colleague over there roped me in, and I've been on the ride ever since. And it has been a journey. I've learned a lot. We've studied, we've had all kinds of sessions. And in here, we have unit managers, we have our men's team, we have higher ups, we have unit managers, we have sergeants, we have people that believe in us that are sitting in this place right now, people on days off in here because they wanted to make sure that they support us. And that, I think we came out, we showed out, and we did what we came to do. And it was an important day. And thank you, Harvard, for showing up and giving us this opportunity to do this with you. It was good, but I'm glad it's over.
Thank you very much, Darlene. That was well put. They put in so much work for those of you at home, and Coach Panetta and Coach Katsoulis, who voluntarily coach for the NPDL, have done such an amazing job of equipping them for what you saw today, considering that they don't have any previous debate experience. So other than Victoria, who was with us last season. So would someone from Harvard like to respond? Oki, please.
Hi, my name is Oge. I'm a junior at Harvard who debates here. And I just want to say thank you so much for letting us do this with y'all. I think that oftentimes, I've been doing debate for a very long time, and as a Black woman debate, one of the many things that you'll see is that as I've gone through debate, there's trinkles of Black women I'll see, or other people I'll see, but it's a very insular space sometimes. And so sometimes we'll talk about law and policies and very separate, out of this world, not really grounded with people. And I think this has been a grounded debate. Just hearing all y'all and being able to engage with all y'all, I think one of the biggest things I can appreciate is the fact that debate has the potential to be a place that we can have discourse, not just on a theoretical level, but as people. And I think that's something that was really exemplified by y'all's last speech when you talk about what debating together meant for all of you who have different backgrounds. Yes, but you could come together on these common grounds. And I think that that's something that debate does well, that we could still have our different sides. Ultimately, there's always an alpha or an egg, and yet we could still have different commonalities and discourse that can bring us together. And so I'm very, very grateful that we were able to have this opportunity to do this again with all of y'all.
Thank you very much. While we have a moment, while we're waiting for Chief Judge Leeper to announce our winner of the actual debate, we'd like to ask if Ed Panetta, one of the volunteer coaches who worked with the women from Maine DOC, Ed, would you like to say a few words about this process? I know you have a unique insight into how this worked out.
Well, first of all, I want to congratulate both teams. I thoroughly enjoyed the debate. And I'm very proud of the work that the women in Maine have done. And you could see a sense of commitment to the ideas that they've been working on, and reflection on the roles that those ideas will play in their own life. And as we talked about in one of our sessions, the real value of debate is the organizational and research skills that you'll bring moving forward. I worked with a men's program in Georgia for many years, and I've met with some of the fellows that are now out in the working world, and they talk about the way in which organized argument and reasoning is helping them. I had a coffee at Starbucks about a week ago with a guy who runs a cement plant in Atlanta, and has to spend time hiring people, and how he's developed communication skills through debate that help him that environment. And hopefully that's a little something that each of you can bring along as you move along in life.
Thank you very much, Ed. Appreciate that. Ed is a brilliant coach, and we're very fortunate at the NPDL to have so many just amazing volunteers from this space who support prison education and debate as we expand within prison systems and states. So the beauty of having this virtual opportunity gives us the ability to draw in volunteers from all over the country and in different schools And we're very excited at continuing to build this work out. So thank you, Ed, for all of your work. You volunteered for a number of weeks and really did a lot of hard work. As the judges still need a little more time to tabulate scores, Tripp, would you like to speak a little bit about debate from your perspective from the Harvard side, sir?
Yeah, sure. Sorry. Yeah, no, we're very happy to be able to participate and, thrilled to see the growth of the NPDL league. And I know there was a round against Boston College last week, and you've got some formidable competitors against Wake Forest next week. So you all are really getting the best of the college debaters. And so I'm so thrilled that our community has been able to engage. And as Oge said, often our debates, we can lose sight of people outside of the debate community. And so these activities are really important for us and for our students. And I know they've learned a lot. And, it's always fun because they're always so busy and you never know what they're going to be able to do. But this debate, they were very excited about, and everyone was able to prepare thoughtfully for. And so, that this is important for everybody. So we're excited by that. This also comes at the end of our season. And so we're happy to be able to keep debating, even though we don't have any more tournaments. And so those opportunities are also exciting for us. And so we hope to be able to do more in the future. And, congratulations to everybody. Very impressed. I'm always impressed with my debaters. They know that. So I'll tell them later. But to the debaters from Maine, excellent job. You are phenomenal speakers. Your hard work has really paid off. A testament to the power of debate and to your own work. So congratulations. Keep it up. I hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you so much, Tripp. And honestly, thank you for hosting us. I'm actually on site here with the Harvard team, with our colleague, Clarence Williams from the NPDL, and they've been gracious enough to host us in their offices. And it's just really nice to both Oge's point and Tripp's point about community. We're building community, and it's not theoretical to us. We are trying to build communities of practice on both sides of the wall. And obviously, public policy debate isn't just academic. While the practice of what you just saw was very complex and its academic arguments all framed in evidence, certainly you get to see all of that. But also important to understand is that incarcerated people often don't have a voice. And being from poor and disadvantaged communities, largely disproportionately, the weight of bad policy falls on individuals who have to live under those sort of conditions, as well as their friends and families in the community. So it's really important to amplify the voices of people who aren't heard on these public policy issues. And that's the beauty of being able to have a policy debate format. And it really is invaluable to be able to allow people to be heard. And honestly, you get a lot of great perspective all the way around. So at the end of a debate like this, regardless of the topic, regardless of the composition of teams, which are always diverse, but we also really think it's important that people understand that you can disagree without being disagreeable. And I think that's one of the beauties of debate, is that you actually get to see someone else's point of view, their perspective, and be in a position where you can understand and empathize with where people are coming from, even if at the end of the day you disagree with their position. You have an understanding of why they hold that position. And I think that's the beauty of debate, especially in being able to open it up to an entire new community who isn't always included in these conversations, especially on a national level, because these policies affect all of us. And again, there's this interconnectivity to it all that I think is a beautiful sort of symmetry to being able to be heard and to have these larger conversations. So with that, I understand that Tricia Flanders from Maine DOC would like to make some remarks. So Tricia, do you have something you'd like to share?
Yeah, I just wanted to say real quick, since I couldn't be there, how proud I am of our team today. You guys did absolutely amazing. Just watching the transformation of the team from day one to today has been amazing to see the amount of time and effort and work that you all have put in, the teamwork, the camaraderie, and then just the support from staff all throughout DOC, so that the teams could do this debate as well as the other debates that we've been doing. I again just wanted to say how proud I am of them.
Thank you, Tricia. And thank you so much for coordinating all this on behalf of Maine DOC. Tricia has been an amazing partner in all of the teams because we work in multiple facilities within the Maine DOC space. And it's just really been a privilege to be able to continue to work with the individuals that are always inspiring us. You know, this is why we do the work, is to create the opportunities. And I can't applaud everyone enough for seeing the vision and supporting the vision and allowing these doors to remain open in a space that's famous for keeping them closed. So I don't think that can be overstated as well. And just before the judges finish tallying their scores, I would also like to acknowledge next week's debate that's coming up with Wake Forest, as Tripp alluded to. This is something that will conclude the NPDL spring season. It'll be our third and final event. And it's going to be on the topic of abolishing life without parole sentences in this country. And it's very much on the ballot in Maine this spring because they don't have a parole system. So we hope that everyone will tune in and support that event. If you haven't seen the link on social media, you can always go to our website, npdl.org. And these are free live stream links that we encourage you to share with your networks and tune in and support the men from Maine State Prison who will be taking on the, I believe, the Triple Crown national champions in Wake Forest, who kind of swept the national debate tournament this year. So they're up against a very formidable foe, and it should be a very dynamic argument. Our very own Clarence Williams will be moderating that event. He himself overturned a life without parole sentence in Massachusetts after 20 years on a wrongful conviction. So we have a lot of important conversations to be had in this space, and we can't wait until we get to have that on the 25th. It'll be next Tuesday at 1 o'clock. So please tune in and support that. And for anyone who misses these videos today or next week, they'll be posted on the NPDL's website at some point in the near future. So I would just like to ask the judges if there's been any progress on the scores yet.
All right, I have all of the ballots.
Awesome. So will you please announce your scores and winners, Chief Judge Leeper?
Yes, give me one. I'm sorry, I need to do one thing. Not trying to add to drama here. I'm really not. Just making sure I have it right.
Well, I got to tell you, that is actually why you're the chief judge. We trust you to make sure the scores are accurate and correct. And while you do so, I would wonder if one of the other judges would like to maybe speak on the experience a little bit from the judge's perspective.
You all really did a tremendous job. I think across both teams, there were a lot of really thoughtful comments. I was really impressed with the combination of evidence and explanation of argument. I thought you did a nice job of sort of explaining the basis for a lot of your arguments, and it was a testament really to how hard everybody worked to prepare. So I really enjoyed it.
All right. So I've totaled everything up. I have all the ballots. I've never announced a decision here before, so I'm assuming, do I give you the sum total for both sides and then the decision?
Absolutely.
Okay. It was very close, which is why I was being careful and double checking my math. But the affirmative team received 570.5 points, and the negative team received 578.5. And so the winner on a close decision is the negative.
Okay, thank you, Chief Judge Leeper. Congratulations to Harvard University on this win. Thank you both teams for engaging in this epic academic contest. Great job on both sides. Like I've said before, there are no losers in a contest like this. This was very humanizing and really, really powerful stuff. And thank you both for putting on all the hard work and preparation. I know that some of our other judges would like to add some comments about this, so I'm going to let Karina, please.
Yeah. Sorry, I have a question, I guess to the chief judge. So I think it's not like by adding all the total scores, it's about each judge have one
Right.
vote. And that way is 2v3, or what is our curious about the final?
It is a 4-1. So I added all those up, and so on the ballots it was a 4-1 decision. But
okay, so for Harvard and one for the okay, yes. I see. Yeah, it's really such an honor to be here judging this wonderful debate. It's my first time kind of being engaged with this prison debate community, but previously I have taken the MIT Prison Initiative class, so I know actually Victoria. Hi. So I think like both teams did a wonderful job, and at the debate, there are many interactions that I was like, wow, that was really a highlight. So I really want to like take this opportunity to shout out to a couple of highlights that I heard. One highlight I think was absolutely wonderful was the cross-examination by the fifth speaker of affirmative to the first speaker of negative. So it's by Victoria. I think that entire questioning, if you develop that more in detail, will be an excellent rebuttal. So I kind of see that as also a missed opportunity for the affirmative, because you basically, in questions could potentially bring down both of the points that the negative made. One is the intersectionality point, and one is the kind of punishing women or like, not giving them as many jobs as they could, but that was so short, only in the cross-examination form, not in a full like 5 to 8 minute speech because of the format. And I think if some of your teammates could, use that and engage more directly with rebutting each of the point, I think, the divide and conquer point could be a good rebuttal to the intersectionality point in the sense of, unionizing effort. I think one person, briefly mentioned that. But I think it was not, I think the debate could be really going to a next level if both sides focus on discussing which kind of legislative efforts are more realistic and more practical, or could, gain the achievement in the shortest time. Is bringing all the women from all the classes, all the racial and ethnic groups together and use that political and economical capital to bargain for a better future for all. Or is, starting right at the intersectionality and, viewing discrimination as a complex issue, is that the better approach? I think that would really be a potential, really nice interactions. And second highlight is just the negatives for speaker. I think Oge, that was really, really amazing. It's probably one of the most impressive rebuttal speeches I've seen, in my debate judging career. So I think really kudos to that. And I just want to say how amazing it is that, to witness this policy debate. And it's really, really involved. And I think, for debate to be this involved and complex really requires both sides excellent performance. I think MDOC and Harvard both did an excellent job, and that's why the decision was hard to make.
Thank you very much, Karina. And it's tough to argue with a Rhodes Scholar, so I'm not going to try. I appreciate the feedback. That was a lot of insight for both teams. And exactly, what I would echo is that you just saw an amazing display of not just human minds at work, but in trying to sharpen each other, but honestly, the synthesis of such complex information and then the ability to communicate it effectively and to look at all sides of it and present it in a way that everyone, including myself, we walk away having learned quite a bit about the issue and about each other. And I think that's the best way to end a debate. So I just want to thank everyone once again, ask everyone to tune in next week for our finale event with Maine State Prison and Wake Forest University. Congratulations again to Harvard University on a well-earned victory. And thank you so much to Maine DOC for all the hard work that you put in. It was an amazing contest. So thank you all. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Tuesday at 1 o'clock. Take it easy.
Right on.